If you think you've seen hell, you haven't been to ADX Florence. Smash that subscribe button if you're ready to descend into America's darkest secret, a place where the worst of humanity goes to vanish forever. Hit like if you dare to know the truth, and drop a comment telling me which Supermax criminal terrifies you the most. Now, let's begin. The sun rises over the Colorado mountains, casting long shadows across a structure that shouldn't exist in a free country. ADX Florence Supermax. The most secure prison ever constructed. A fortress designed not just to hold men, but to break them. 700 miles of nothing but desert, rock, and silence surround it. No towns nearby. No roads leading directly to it. Just emptiness, as if the architects wanted to place it beyond the reach of hope itself. Inside these walls, 364 inmates exist in a state between life and death. They are buried alive in concrete cells measuring 7 feet by 12 feet. Each cell contains a concrete bed, a concrete desk, a concrete stool, and a narrow window positioned so high and angled so precisely that inmates can see nothing but a sliver of sky. They cannot see the mountains. They cannot see the horizon. They cannot see freedom. They can only see a reminder that somewhere, beyond their reach, the world continues without them. Thomas Silverstein spent 36 years in solitary confinement before he died in these walls. He never touched another human being in all that time. No handshakes. No hugs. No contact whatsoever. The guards called him Terrible Tom, the man too dangerous to be around anyone. He killed a prison guard in 1983, and the system decided he would never know human connection again. When he finally died in 2019, he had become something less than human, something the prison had carefully constructed through decades of isolation. But Silverstein wasn't the most dangerous man in ADX Florence. That distinction belongs to men whose names still send chills through law enforcement. El Chapo, the drug lord who escaped 2 maximum security Mexican prisons through elaborate tunnels, now sits in a cell designed to ensure he'll never see daylight without shackles. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, who terrorized America for nearly 2 decades with package bombs, died here in 2023, his brilliant mind slowly deteriorating in the silence. Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, spends 23 hours a day alone, his plans for destruction reduced to memories that haunt only him. The routine at ADX Florence is designed to destroy the human spirit. Inmates wake at 5 in the morning to artificial light that never quite replicates the sun. Breakfast arrives through a slot in the door. No interaction. No conversation. Just a tray that appears and disappears like a ghost. For 23 hours, they remain in their cells. The walls are soundproofed. They cannot hear other inmates. They cannot communicate through vents or pipes. The architects thought of everything. Even the toilets are designed to prevent prisoners from splashing water as a form of communication. 1 hour of recreation is permitted. They are escorted in handcuffs and leg irons to a slightly larger concrete box, this one open to the sky. They call it the dog run because it resembles a kennel more than a yard. 10 feet by 20 feet of nothing. Some inmates use this hour to pace. Others stand motionless, faces tilted toward whatever piece of sky they can see, absorbing sunlight like plants on the verge of death. In 2012, a corrections officer named Marcus Webb began noticing something strange during his rounds. Small marks on the walls of certain cells. Scratches that seemed deliberately placed, forming patterns he couldn't quite decipher. Webb had worked at ADX Florence for 8 years. He knew every inch of the facility. These marks were new, or at least newly visible. He reported them to his supervisor, who dismissed them as the desperate scratches of men losing their minds. But Webb couldn't let it go. He started documenting the marks, photographing them during his shifts. The patterns appeared in 5 different cells, all in the same wing. The inmates in these cells had nothing in common. Different crimes. Different gang affiliations. Different security levels. Yet somehow, they were creating identical marks. 3 weeks after Webb started his investigation, something unprecedented happened. During the morning head count, guards discovered that inmate Carlos Menendez was missing from his cell. Not escaped. The door was still locked from the outside. The window was intact. The concrete walls showed no signs of damage. But Menendez, a cartel enforcer serving 6 consecutive life sentences, had vanished from a cell that should have been impossible to leave. The prison went into immediate lockdown. Every cell was searched. Every inch of the facility was inspected. Guards tore apart Menendez's cell, removing the concrete furniture, examining the walls with industrial equipment. They found nothing. No tunnel. No hidden passage. No explanation. 2 days later, they found something else. In the wall behind Menendez's concrete desk, hidden behind a layer of carefully replaced cement, was a small cavity. Inside that cavity was a folded piece of paper covered in handwriting so small it required a magnifying glass to read. The note contained detailed architectural plans of ADX Florence. Plans that should not exist outside classified government files. Plans that showed something the guards had never known about. A series of old utility tunnels running beneath the prison, remnants of the original construction, supposedly sealed off decades ago. But when they opened the hatch that led to those tunnels, what they found changed everything. The hatch opened into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the flashlight beams whole. Captain Sarah Chen descended first, her boots echoing against metal rungs that hadn't been touched in years. The air below was thick, stale, carrying the scent of rust and something else she couldn't identify. Something organic. Something that made her hand instinctively move toward her sidearm. The tunnel stretched in both directions, narrow concrete passages barely wide enough for a man to walk through without turning sideways. Pipes ran along the ceiling, some dripping condensation that had pooled on the floor. The walls were covered in a thin layer of moisture, and in that moisture, Chen saw them. Handprints. Dozens of them, leading deeper into the darkness. "Get forensics down here now," Chen radioed to the surface. "And bring the blueprints. The real ones. I want to know where these tunnels go." The team that assembled over the next hour included FBI agents, structural engineers, and the prison's original architect, a 72-year-old man named Robert Hardwick who had designed ADX Florence in 1994. When they showed him the tunnels, his face went pale. "These were supposed to be filled with concrete," Hardwick said, his voice shaking. "During construction, we discovered old mining tunnels from the 19th century. The decision was made to seal them completely. Pour them full of concrete. Make them unusable. Then how is this here?" Chen demanded, gesturing at the very obviously unsealed passage. Hardwick had no answer. But the blueprints he brought told a story that made everyone in that tunnel understand how catastrophically they had failed. The mining tunnels formed a network beneath the entire prison complex. They connected to all 4 wings. They ran under the administrative buildings. And according to the original geological surveys, they eventually connected to an abandoned mine shaft 3 miles outside the prison perimeter. 3 miles. In the Colorado wilderness. With no fences. No cameras. No guards. Carlos Menendez had vanished 72 hours ago. If he had reached that mine shaft, he could be anywhere by now. Mexico. Canada. Hidden in some cartel safe house, laughing at the fortress that couldn't hold him. But the investigation was only beginning to reveal its true horror. FBI forensic teams worked through the night, processing the tunnels. What they found suggested Menendez wasn't the first to discover this route. DNA evidence indicated at least 3 other individuals had been in these tunnels within the past 6 months. Hair samples. Skin cells. Traces of blood on the rough concrete where someone had scraped against the walls. The problem was, according to prison records, no other inmates were missing. Every cell had been accounted for during the lockdown. Every prisoner was exactly where they were supposed to be. So whose DNA was this? Marcus Webb, the corrections officer who had first noticed the wall markings, provided the answer that broke the case wide open. He had spent weeks reviewing security footage, cross-referencing guard schedules, looking for any anomaly. What he found was subtle. Almost invisible. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Guard shift changes happened every 8 hours. During those changes, there was a 6-minute window when certain sections of the prison had reduced camera coverage due to the physical movement of personnel. 6 minutes when someone who knew the system intimately could move through blind spots. 6 minutes that occurred 3 times every day. Webb pulled footage from those windows over the past year. And there, visible only because he knew exactly where to look, were shadows moving through corridors where no one should be. Quick movements. Calculated. Someone who understood the camera angles perfectly. The forensic team ran the DNA found in the tunnels through every database available. It took 48 hours, but eventually they got matches. 3 hits. All corrections officers. All employees who had worked at ADX Florence for over a decade. All trusted members of the staff who had passed every background check, every psychological evaluation, every security clearance. Their names were Officer David Reeves, Officer Patricia Gomez, and Officer James Hutchinson. When federal agents went to arrest them, they found Reeves and Gomez at home, seemingly unaware anything was wrong. But Hutchinson was gone. His apartment was empty, cleared out, as if he had never lived there at all. Under interrogation, Reeves broke first. The story he told was almost impossible to believe, yet every detail checked out. 5 years ago, a man approached him outside a grocery store. The man knew things about Reeves that no stranger should know. His gambling debts. His daughter's medical bills. His desperate financial situation. The man offered a solution. $20,000 for a simple favor. Look the other way during one shift change. Ignore one security alert. That's all. Reeves took the money. He told himself it was one time. One compromise. But one time became 2, then 5, then routine. The money kept coming. 50,000. 100,000. Enough to save his house. Enough to pay for his daughter's treatment. Enough to trap him completely. The man who recruited him was never named. Reeves only knew him as the architect. He communicated through encrypted messages that deleted themselves. He never showed his face. He never met in person after that first encounter. But his instructions were always precise, always detailed, always resulted in the exact outcome he desired. Patricia Gomez told a similar story. So did 3 other guards they arrested over the following week. All recruited. All compromised. All part of a network that had been operating inside ADX Florence for years. But the question remained, why? What was the purpose of this elaborate system? If the goal was escape, why hadn't more inmates disappeared? Why just Menendez? The answer came from an unexpected source. El Chapo's attorney requested an emergency meeting with federal prosecutors. He brought evidence his client had been holding as insurance. Documents. Recordings. Proof that the tunnel network wasn't being used for escape. It was being used for communication. For coordination. For running criminal empires from inside the world's most secure prison. The scratches on the walls that Webb had photographed weren't random. They were codes. Instructions. Orders being passed between cells, then carried out through the tunnels by corrupt guards. Drug shipments. Assassinations. Money laundering operations. All coordinated from inside ADX Florence by inmates who were supposed to be completely isolated from the outside world. Carlos Menendez hadn't escaped to freedom. He had escaped to carry out a hit. The cartel needed someone eliminated, someone who had betrayed them, and Menendez was the weapon they deployed. The entire tunnel system, the corrupt guards, the elaborate network, it all existed to turn America's most secure prison into a base of operations for organized crime. Federal agents raided 17 locations simultaneously based on the intelligence. They expected to find cartel safe houses. Money. Weapons. What they found was far worse. In a warehouse outside Denver, they discovered James Hutchinson, the missing corrections officer. He was dead, had been for at least 24 hours. But he wasn't alone. Beside his body were detailed plans for something that made every agent in that warehouse reach for their phones. Plans for a mass breakout. Not just Menendez. Not just a few inmates. Every high-value prisoner in ADX Florence. 37 of the most dangerous criminals in America, all scheduled to disappear in 72 hours. And according to the documents, the operation was already in motion. The command center at ADX Florence transformed into a war room within minutes. FBI Director Raymond Cross stood at the head of a conference table surrounded by Homeland Security agents, tactical teams, and engineers studying blueprints that now seemed like elaborate lies. The prison they thought was impenetrable had become a ticking time bomb, and they had less than 3 days to defuse it. "Talk to me about the timeline," Cross demanded, his eyes fixed on Captain Sarah Chen. Chen pointed to the documents recovered from Hutchinson's body. "According to this, the breakout happens during the night shift rotation on Friday at 0200 hours. That's when staffing is lowest and the tunnel access points are least monitored. They've planned for 18 months. Every detail is accounted for. How many guards are compromised? We've identified and arrested 8 so far. But these documents suggest there are at least 15 involved. We don't know who the others are." The room fell silent. 15 corrupt guards in a facility with only 63 total corrections officers meant nearly a quarter of the staff couldn't be trusted. Any order given, any plan made, could be fed directly to the criminals orchestrating this operation. Cross made the decision immediately. Full evacuation. Move every high-value target to separate facilities across the country. We do it tonight, unannounced, with federal marshals we know are clean. But as tactical teams began preparing for the largest prisoner transfer in modern history, Marcus Webb sat alone in a monitoring room, watching security footage from a different angle. Something about the documents bothered him. The plan was too detailed, too perfect. He had learned during his investigation that criminal operations always had contingencies, backup plans, chaos built into the design. This was too clean. He pulled up footage from the past 72 hours, focusing not on the inmates or the identified corrupt guards, but on the civilians who had accessed the facility. Lawyers, medical staff, maintenance contractors. His eyes stopped on one figure. A man in a maintenance uniform who had entered the administrative wing 2 days ago, signed in as Michael Torres from a company called Apex Facilities Management. Webb ran the company name. It didn't exist. He checked the visitor logs against employment records. Michael Torres had never worked at ADX Florence before this week, yet he had access to restricted areas that required months of security clearance. Someone had created an entire false identity, complete with credentials that fooled the system. Webb pulled up the footage of Torres moving through the building. The man knew exactly where he was going. No hesitation. No checking directions. He walked directly to the server room that housed the prison's entire digital infrastructure. Security cameras, electronic locks, communication systems. Everything. "Oh God," Webb whispered, reaching for his radio. "Captain Chen, we have a problem." But the radio was dead. He tried his cell phone. No signal. He ran to the door and found it locked from the outside, the electronic mechanism unresponsive. Through the small window, he could see guards moving through the corridor, but they didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Or perhaps they were part of it. At that same moment, in the command center, every screen went black simultaneously. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the room in red. Cross grabbed his radio, but before he could speak, every speaker in the facility crackled to life with a voice none of them recognized. "Good evening, Director Cross. My name is irrelevant, but you can call me what your officers have, the architect." The voice was calm, almost pleasant, with a faint accent that suggested European education. "You've discovered my tunnel network. Congratulations. You've arrested some of my employees. Well done. You've even found my decoy plans for a mass breakout. That must have been very exciting for you." Cross's jaw tightened. "This facility is locked down. Whatever you're planning, it's over." Laughter echoed through the speakers. "Director, the breakout was never the plan. It was the distraction. While you've spent the last 72 hours focused on tunnels and corrupt guards, I've had complete access to your systems. Every electronic lock in this facility is now under my control. Every camera. Every communication line. I own ADX Florence." On the screens, images began appearing. Live feeds from cells throughout the prison. Inmates standing at their doors, which were slowly, silently sliding open. Not all of them. Just specific ones. 37 cells, exactly as the decoy documents had specified. You see, the genius of ADX Florence is its isolation, the architect continued. Each inmate locked away, unable to communicate, unable to coordinate. But what happens when you remove those barriers? What happens when you put the world's most dangerous criminals in the same space, with no guards to stop them? Chen's blood ran cold. He's turning them loose inside the prison. They're going to kill each other. Not each other, Captain. The architect corrected, as if he could hear her. They're going to kill very specific people. Witnesses who testified against them. Informants. Rivals. I've spent 5 years building relationships with these men, learning who they want dead, promising them this moment. And now I'm delivering. On the screens, inmates emerged from their cells into the corridors. El Chapo. Koboni Savage. Zokhar Zarnaev. Men who had orchestrated murders, terrorism, and organized crime on massive scales. They moved with purpose, heading toward specific cells, specific targets. The first scream came through the speakers within seconds. Cross was already moving, barking orders. Tactical teams, breach the facility now. Override every lock manually. Get those prisoners back in their cells. But the architect had planned for this too. When tactical teams reached the cell block doors, they found them sealed shut by magnetic locks running on a separate power system. The backup generators that should have allowed manual override had been sabotaged. The teams began cutting through the steel doors with torches, but it would take time. Time measured in lives. Inside the prison, chaos erupted. Some inmates sought revenge. Others saw opportunity for escape through the confusion. A few, the truly psychotic ones, simply reveled in the violence they had been denied for years. The soundproofed walls that once enforced silence now trapped the screams inside. But Marcus Webb, still locked in the monitoring room, saw something the others missed. On one screen, a single inmate remained in his cell despite the open door. Thomas Garrett, serving life for orchestrating a series of contract killings. Webb had interviewed Garrett during his investigation. The man was intelligent, calculating, and had shown unusual interest in the prison security systems. Webb used the monitoring equipment to zoom in on Garrett's cell. The inmate was sitting at his concrete desk, and on that desk was a small device, something that shouldn't exist in ADX Florence. A laptop, crude but functional, apparently assembled from smuggled parts over months or years. Garrett was typing, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. On Webb's screen, code began scrolling past. Someone inside the prison was fighting back against the architect's control, trying to regain access to the systems. Webb made a decision. He couldn't get out, couldn't warn anyone through normal channels. But he could access the internal communication system for the monitoring room. He typed a message directly to Garrett's cell number, praying the inmate would see it. "Can you stop this?" The response came 30 seconds later. "Not stop. Redirect. Give me 2 minutes." Those 2 minutes felt like hours. On the screens, Webb watched prisoners closing in on their targets. He watched guards trapped in safe rooms, unable to intervene. He watched the tactical team still cutting through doors, the sparks from their torches the only light in darkened corridors. Then, suddenly, every cell door in the facility slammed shut simultaneously. Inmates caught in corridors found themselves trapped between sealed barriers. Those who had reached their targets were locked inside cells with their victims, unable to finish what they'd started. The prison had become a maze of steel boxes, each containing a separate nightmare. The architect's voice returned, now sounding strained. "What are you doing? That's not possible. I control those systems." A new voice came through the speakers. Thomas Garrett, speaking with the quiet confidence of someone who had just won a chess match. "You controlled them. Past tense. You made one mistake, architect. You assumed no one inside these walls was smarter than you. I've been building backdoors into this prison's systems for 3 years. Every update, every patch, I've been there. You might have planned this for 5 years, but I've been planning my own game much longer." Within minutes, tactical teams breached the facility and began the systematic process of securing each sealed section. They found 6 inmates dead, killed by others before Garrett's intervention. 11 were seriously injured. The rest were locked down, the brief taste of freedom snatched away as quickly as it had been given. But the architect himself remained a ghost. Despite FBI teams tracing his signal, raiding the location they identified, they found only more equipment, more layers of misdirection. The man who had nearly destroyed ADX Florence from the inside had vanished, leaving behind only questions. In the aftermath, the prison was completely overhauled. The tunnels were filled with concrete, properly this time, under constant supervision. Every guard was re-vetted. Every system was rebuilt from scratch. ADX Florence became even more secure than before, if such a thing was possible. Thomas Garrett received a transfer to a medium-security facility as unofficial compensation for his intervention, though officially the reason given was administrative necessity. He never spoke publicly about what happened, maintaining the silence that had defined his years in solitary. Carlos Menendez was found 3 weeks later in a safe house outside Juarez, Mexico. He never made it to trial. Someone, presumably the cartel that had used him, decided he knew too much about the architect's network. Sarah Chen resigned from ADX Florence 6 months after the incident. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had won a battle but lost something larger. In her exit interview, she said something that haunted everyone who heard it: "We built the most secure prison in the world, and someone turned it into a weapon. What happens when they try again?" 2 years later, on a cold morning in December, a package arrived at FBI headquarters addressed to Director Cross. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note: "ADX Florence was the prototype. I've learned from my mistakes. The next fortress will fall quieter, cleaner, and you'll never see it coming. Thank you for the education." The architect. The FBI investigation remains open. The architect remains uncaught. And somewhere in America's network of Supermax prisons, his next plan may already be in motion, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to transform security into chaos. If you made it this far, you now know the truth about America's most secure prison. But here's the real question that should keep you awake tonight. If ADX Florence can be compromised, if the fortress can become the weapon, then nowhere is truly safe. Subscribe, because the next story goes even deeper into the systems we trust and the people who know how to break them. And believe me, after what I've uncovered, you're going to want to hear what comes next.